Welcome to Reclaiming Narratives,
a podcast by 4D.
My name is B.
I'm Winnie.
I'm Nika.
I'm Hannah.
And we are four friends
who met in our HR roles in the corporate world.
And we're intentional about fostering a sisterhood
that has truly been special.
In this podcast, we invite you to come and be a part of our real life conversations
about all things being thriving Black women in the professional world.
Our WhatsApp convos have left the chat,
and we invite you to be part of it.
Enjoy.
Hey ladies, so really quickly, I had a conversation last night with my mentee. We've been talking for a few months now, and she has been with her company for a few years. And we both have been discussing her next role, which would be a senior leadership role. And as we're talking, I could hear a lot of imposter syndrome. You know, what if I'm not ready? You know, what if somebody else is more ready than I am? And it just made me think about actually when we are going for these roles, kind of all of the limiting beliefs that we have. And so, yeah, it was really interesting. And she just made some really interesting observations that I thought I would bring to the chat.
So what did she say?
So she's been my mentee for about 3 years now, and she's been navigating her career. And I know that she is ready for the next leadership role. It's a senior role. She's got so much experience, but there's so much fear that she has around making that jump. And I often feel like also sometimes the workplace doesn't support us when we're trying to make that leap into senior leadership positions. And it just made me think about actually the evolution of leadership and what leadership looks like today and what it looked like maybe 10 years ago, because I can see her as a leader of the future. But when she's going for interviews, I think there's some imposter syndrome there around, well, you know, are these leaders of the past, and will they think that I am ready for it? And so I wanted to have this conversation with you around just, you know, breaking the glass ceiling. Is it a glass ceiling? Sometimes we call it the brass ceiling to add the lens of being a Black woman, right? As you're going into that space. And so I'd love to hear your thoughts on kind of, you know, I know all of you are leaders in your own rights. Like, when was the first time you broke into leadership, and you know, what were the things that you felt you needed at that time?
Yeah. So it's interesting. In the organization we all worked in before, there was a performance framework that I felt was so enlightening when it came to how I perceive leadership. I didn't think I would be saying that today, but here we are. And it was talking about being a leader of self, being a leader of others, and being a leader of leaders. And for me, that was the first time I recognized that to be a leader of other people, you need to evidence that you can lead yourself. And taking ownership of that leadership trajectory, being vigilant of how you show up, how you brand yourself, the skills and competencies that you are leading for, because you know that helps you and prepares you for the next step, is super important. And there's this phenomenal book I read. It's called Be the Leader You Want to See by Susie Ramroot. I'm looking at B because she knows I talk about that book all the time. And there's so much wisdom in that book. But I remember the first time reading, and it talked about a lot of women pick the number 2 position because we actually find it easier to support someone else who is leading than taking the leadership role for ourselves. And putting those two thoughts together, being able to understand that actually I can lead myself, and in demonstrating that I could lead anybody because I know how to lead myself, has been such an epiphany for me.
Yeah. And obviously people sometimes, when you think about leadership, you go straight to thinking about leadership of teams. Straight away, it's like...
the difference between leadership and management.
Absolutely. And the thing is, everyone can lead.
Yeah.
And one of the things I would encourage your mentee to think about are some of their strengths. I think as a leader, it's really important to be strengths-based and to focus on dialing those up as much as you can. It's also worth them thinking about some of the traits that are highly sought after in leaders today. So for me, for example, one of the characteristics I'm really keen to dial up is my empathy, you know, innovation, that thought leadership. And I think that if your mentee can start to get clear on the types of traits that they would like to have associated with their leadership style, even in the absence of having a team or a direct report to manage, they can still demonstrate that capability in their day-to-day. When they are assigned tasks, how do they influence? How do they create followership? How do they have impact regardless of the seniority of the various stakeholders in the rooms that they are entering? Anyone can lead regardless of whether you have a team or not.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I think for me, it's also about recognizing that you can also lead through people. So it's not always, I absolutely agree with you, it is about leadership of self, but also it could be that you are not in a leadership position, but you take a leadership role in your team, and people see you and see them traits that you talk about in you. Because she talked about imposter syndrome, and I'd love to get your take on imposter syndrome, where there's this self-doubt on whether I can be a leader. But yet you're leading projects. Every time somebody wants a question, they come to you, you're the go-to person. All them things are traits of a really good leader. But sometimes if it's not recognized by others, we think it's not there.
Yeah, I think it's so, what's really interesting when Winnie talks about Susie's book and when she talks about women being the number 2, I think leadership is celebrated as you being the point person for success, but leadership should be serving.
And
I think if that was the true reflection, then you would find more women going to the number 1 position, because that's what we do.
Nice.
We serve.
Yeah.
And I think it's really important that, I love your point about, was it Winnie? Leading self.
Yeah.
Because that, you don't need a team.
No.
You don't need the authority of a title. You just need, if I'm going to be involved in anything, it's going to be excellent, it's going to get done, and I'm going to use whatever it is. So it's not about managing, and that's why I state the distinction between leadership and management, because it's very blurred. In organizations, they give lots of people teams to manage because someone's technically good. Doesn't mean they're a leader, doesn't even mean they're a manager.
Yep.
And they blur the lines. You can have someone who's an individual contributor, so no team, but is a leader, because when they walk into a room, I used to do something in an old organization, I'd walk into a room and I'd be like, the solution is here. Because as far as I'm concerned, I don't care what you guys are talking about, but I know that I'm gonna contribute and I'm gonna add value. Doesn't matter if I've got a team, without a team, my headspace is, if I'm going to pay attention to something, it gets done. And I think that mindset, it's so interlinked with confidence, and that's why imposter syndrome and leadership is a yin yang, because you have to, it's like, I always tell people it's best to interview when you're employed, because the confidence and it's a yin and yang. So the confidence about leading, you have to feel it, you have to believe it as well. So for your mentee, it's an academic exercise. What are you trying to portray? The one thing I will say about organizations, though, being a business partner and having led lots of roundtables, 2 schools of thought. One is, I'm going to promote you because you're already doing the job, or I'm going to promote you to give you a stretch. 2 different things. So now it's like, well, I know there's a stretch, I know there's a development opportunity, can I do the job? Or I think sometimes it's a bit harsh to go, wait for that person to be doing the job before you promote them, because sometimes to do the job, they're waiting for the authority of the title. And that's why I'm a big fan of just lead. You can't be like, well, they don't pay me for that. But just lead from your own integrity. And I think that gets you over the line faster than waiting for permission.
Absolutely, because the way leaders are appointed is very questionable. I have to say,
It's very subjective.
There are so many leaders who are fantastic, high-performing sales people, or people that are doing a different type of job. Maybe they're a great project manager, and they're elevated to leadership because they're good at their previous job. And so therefore you then come across leaders who don't actually know how to manage and support and coach and develop people, but have a track record of high performance in previous roles. And so when you get new leaders who are, know their worth, know their value, they are competing with, actually, but this person is great, that has proven that they can sell or something. Whereas actually leadership is its own
standalone skill set.
It really is. And we've touched on imposter syndrome a few times. And one thing I would say is that I personally don't believe that imposter syndrome is ever anything that you completely overcome. I feel that you need to navigate it. Personally, I feel that imposter syndrome and experiences of that is a reminder that you're human. And to some extent, it keeps us humble as well. So that's one point I would like to make. Another, just going back to how people are elevating to leadership roles, it's really important that you ask yourself before you embark on a leadership role in an organization, is that the organization for you? Because if from a cultural perspective, they have been elevating people into leadership roles for all the wrong reasons, that in itself is a bit of a red flag for me in terms of whether or not it's the right organization for me to be in and to thrive in based on my values and my core belief system and what should be praised universally in terms of leadership traits and characteristics. So it's really important as well that there is that alignment so that you can thrive, and so that as you transition into leadership roles, you feel there's a safe environment for you to fail fast, to fail forward, and that people won't be waiting for you to slip up.
One of the biggest things for me in leadership is authenticity. Because easily what can happen is you've had a number of different leaders and then you want to assimilate. You think, oh yeah, that's what leadership looks like. And so, we talked about it before around bringing yourself and your true self. For me, the best leaders I've had are the leaders who have been authentic, who you can tell are genuine, who care and who care about people. Because if you look after your people, the people will look after your business. I'm sure Richard Branson said that. And so for me, I would love to ask you about authenticity. I know we've talked about bringing your whole self to work, but how important is it from a leadership perspective?
So I have two schools of thought on this. The first is that authenticity and vulnerability are so important as leaders because, there's times when you work with leaders and they've just got a wall up and you can't penetrate it. You don't get to know them because they feel maybe they have to have a barrier up. And I think, we talked about imposter syndrome. I think that has a big part to play in it because, like Nick Hay said, you don't always ever get away from imposter syndrome. It's something people are navigating every day. But because of that, some people feel that they'll get caught out. So it's like, I have to build a wall because if people get beyond this wall, they'll realize that I'm just here masquerading. Right? And the reality is it's okay for people to know sometimes that you're figuring it out and you're working it out. You don't have all the answers, but we're going to find the solutions together. Actually, you talked about leading through people. I may not know everything. My team may be stronger than me. It takes vulnerability to recognize that we've hired the best people to do the job. And sometimes you have to step out the picture for them to shine. And then the second school of thought, and I think this is so important, that when we see leaders we aspire to and we get closer to them, especially if they've chosen to mentor us or support us or sponsor us, that we don't judge them. And even if they might seem like they deserve to be judged, don't do it. There's a piece by Positive Intelligence called The 10 Saboteurs. And one of them is Little Miss Judge. I know we've learnt about it on a program we've been on together. And one of the things I learned is also in the Susie Ramroot book, that you cultivate the voice you use often. So what you find is when you judge leaders who are vulnerable, who are authentic, being their selves, even when it's not in the best light, you practice using your judgmental voice and you start to use it on you.
Right.
So it's important that leaders can be authentic, that they can be vulnerable, but we all have to take responsibility for creating a space that nurtures that. Because if we judge people, we just create cycles. We judge them, we then don't show up in the way that is important for us to show up as leaders. So that's really important.
I agree. And you touched on a really good leadership trait, vulnerability. And one of my favorite authors, thought leaders, Brené Brown, she talks a lot about courage and vulnerability. And I read a really powerful LinkedIn article that spoke about the fact that if as a leader you want to make your mark in the world and you want to create followership, you have to lean into the power of storytelling. But for you to storytell, you have to be willing to be vulnerable. But if you can be vulnerable and, release these stories, like share them and let people in, you can create that followership and you can then connect with people on a human basis and show to them that actually you are just like them trying to figure out this thing called life.
But vulnerability is in leadership has been an evolution.
Agreed.
Because leadership 20 years ago was very it was much of a dictatorship.
I was just going to say it's a big struggle for me, vulnerability. I went on a course that steeped in Brené Brown stuff, and they were talking about, I checked out at the start and I just put my hand up and I said it's a big, because I've come from the school of thought, I'm your boss because I know everything. That's how we kind of grew up in our careers. And so you feel like you can't say, I don't know. You feel like you have to know how to get everything done. So it's been a real unlearning and a real learning curve for me to come in as I've grown in my career to go, right, I'm going to hire you because you do this and you do this well, and I'm going to give you that space. And I think having leaders like that, and I've seen it, experienced it, has helped.
Yeah.
But it's still, I think I posted about it, one of my very few posts on LinkedIn, was really, it's so resonated, because I was like, I'm not, background as well. We just, Black women, we just don't go out saying we don't know or we can't do. We just get it done, and then we wonder why we're exhausted.
Yeah. I remember I had a mentor once who said, lean into your strengths. And the idea was that instead of focusing on your development areas or what you're not good at, lean into what you're good at, and then surround yourself with people who are good at the things that you're not good at. So from a vulnerability perspective, that starts with understanding and unpicking what you're not good at. And that is sometimes the hard piece. In DEI, people are very, they're very cautious about what they say. They don't want to sit in the uncomfortability. And so therefore they steer away from vulnerability. They steer away from wanting to be seen as a person who doesn't know, or the person who isn't inclusive. And so therefore they either say nothing, or they put a mask on that's not authentic. And so I think the vulnerability piece for me is, if you were looking into the future of what leadership looks like in the future, vulnerability, empathy, compassion, all these things are really, really important. And so going back to, what we were saying with this mentee, I think her fear of bringing her whole self is because of the corporate world, really. It's because of what it's always been known. I want to switch the conversation a little bit. So another bugbear, well, this is my bugbear now, is that everybody's trying to be a business owner. And there are many of us that actually love doing the work that we do in the workplace, in the corporate space, in a professional space. And so this notion of entrepreneurship is really interesting to me. The fact that actually you can be entrepreneurial, but in the workplace. I'd love to get into that with you. What do you think?
Do you know what? I'm the queen of an entrepreneurship.
Yes, girl.
Because that's been my bread and butter. And I remember being maybe 22 in the workplace and being in South Africa and running an entrepreneurship workshop for other people in other organizations, because it had been such a catalyst for me in seeing my career grow. And for anyone who doesn't understand the concept, entrepreneurship is when essentially you see yourself as an innovator or entrepreneur in the workplace. So you find solutions in your place of work rather than taking those opportunities and creating a side hustle or a business outside, for example. And for me, that's looked like whether I was being the co-chair of an employee resource group, or coming up with a new banking product that the business could then go and commercialize, for example, or coming up with new ways of working, or creating new projects to solve problems. And a lot of the time, I remember when I first started out in my journey of entrepreneurship, some of the people I'd work with would say, should we just take this and go and do it outside? Or do we just stay here and give it to the business? Because actually with entrepreneurship, sometimes when you create solutions, you don't own the intellectual property. It's the intellectual property of your business. But there are two things that I think are benefits. One being, when you're doing something inside of an organization, you can have the tools and resources, so funding, sponsorship, etc., to get it forward in a way that you might not get access to outside of work. But then the second thing I always say is skills are not wasted ever. So if you ever created something internally and your business ran with it and they made money from it, you can tell that story about how you shaped, delivered, and drove that. That could still stand you in good stead as a thought leader in the field for doing stuff like that. So that knowledge or wisdom or experience is never wasted. It can only help you.
Absolutely.
I completely agree. And I love the point that you made about, if you go down the entrepreneurship route, it gives you access to resources that will enable you to take a particular initiative or idea forward. And at my current company, which I recently returned to, I was able to launch a mentoring program, which is now in its 4th cohort. Had I done this on my own and gone down the entrepreneurial route, who knows what the fate would have been. I may have had success, I may not have, but by doing it in partnership with the organisation, we got the sponsorship that we needed, we've had the back in the sponsorship, and the reach has been phenomenal. So I really encourage, all of us, whenever we have an idea, just to pause and actually think, based on who the beneficiaries are of that particular initiative, what is the right thing to do, and to get out of our own way, not let our egos determine ultimately which path we go down.
I think it's a perfect example of leadership. If you're in an organization that prioritizes, we want to see you doing the job before we promote you, it's a great way to narrative and go out and find an opportunity, because it's a great example to give. I co-chaired an ESG because no one there reports into you. So you're getting people to do stuff. You are influencing, you are negotiating, you are coming up with a vision that gets executed. You don't get the opportunity to do that in your current role because you're aspiring. So for your mentee, if that was an opportunity for her to get involved in, it's a great sales pitch to go, I'm badass, I do this because, you know, this is the opportunity I found within the organization, right? So I think it's a perfect example.
And also it gives that individual who might see themselves as being relatively junior exposure
Exactly.
to a whole host of individuals at various levels who could actually then find themselves being very influential in that person's trajectory. Maybe they then sponsor them, they become an advocate for them, they think of opportunities and signpost your mentee to them that your mentee themselves may have missed or may not have considered themselves for.
Absolutely. And, you know, when you're moving into a new role or a senior role, they often ask for breadth. And so leadership goes hand in hand with entrepreneurship for me, because you want to, when you start to progress in your career, as you start to get more senior, it is about breadth. It is about innovation. It's about how are you going to take this business to the next level? What are you doing for the organization? And so you might not be entitled to the intellectual property, but what you can do is absolutely attribute that to how you are driving your business forward. And so therefore that should come with a promotion. It should come with more exposure. It should come with leaders that kind of back you, sponsors. And so I suppose people sometimes think like, oh, you know, we have to go and get a business. You shouldn't work for nobody. You should work for yourself. But you can be highly successful. Well, we are highly successful. You know, but you can be highly successful, innovative, you know, proactive in your jobs. And I just don't think we give that enough credit. We don't talk enough about it. And sometimes you shame people. Like there's a lot of people out there that says, oh, why would you want to work for somebody? Go and work for yourself. And people feel bad for working a full-time job, which actually I just don't think is right. There's so many ways.
Different strokes, right? And I think we've talked a lot about getting to know yourself. You define what success is to you.
Absolutely.
There's loads of people who have great careers, loads of people who have great businesses, loads of people who have both.
Yeah.
Right? So it's whatever floats your boat. So people that go, oh, why are you working for someone? That's what floats your boat.
Yeah.
I've done corporate all my life. I would love to have a business, but in addition, I don't think, I love it. I love my job. Yeah. So I'm not working and thinking, oh, I just need to get this business to escape from.
Exactly.
You see what I mean? But that's me. I would never go and shame someone who's got a business and go, well, why would you want to do that? So to each their own. But it comes from knowing yourself. Now, if you don't know and someone says that, that's when you go, oh, am I in the right thing or in the wrong thing? When you know, you can then identify the opportunities and devote yourself to it. So.
Yeah, absolutely.
I completely agree. And also, we need to be very strategic as quote unquote underrepresented groups. We're going to think about the impact that we're going to have in the reach. We have to ensure that we are distributed in several arenas.
Yeah,
so we need to be in the corporate organizations where we can have influence, where we can drive things forward. We could be strategic, have seats around those tables where key decisions are being made. And there also needs to be a group of us who are actually entrepreneurs, who have access to different markets, being the innovation ecosystem, access to founders, etc. That is how you have the impact and the reach and can sustain the results that you're trying to achieve as a collective. You know, there's strength in numbers and we have to have that mindset.
Absolutely. And, you know, even in the kind of the theme of the Black History Month, which is changing the narrative, I think you're so right. We can't just be in one place. We can't just be in business. Actually, we need to be around the table where the decisions are being made. Absolutely. So let's turn it a little bit from a race perspective. So we are Black women, right, in leadership positions. That has its own complexity. They have their own layers as leaders. How do we show up? You know, sadly, we are the only ones in the room, you know, and that can be challenging. I'd love to hear your thoughts on that. You know, I think we've passed the point of dimming our lights. I think we walk into rooms with our heads held high, and I think that has come with time. I don't think that, you know, I wasn't holding my head up very high 15 years ago, but I'd love to hear from you just kind of, you know, how have you showed up as a leader now, even when you're the only one in the room sometimes?
I think I had an initial extreme reaction, and Winnie will attest to this. So for quite a few years, I had really big hair, and that was me kind of, giving the finger to no one's going to tell me what hair I'm going to wear. And so I had big hair. So when I walked into a room, a black woman had walked into the room, and it was not, no, you cannot touch it. No, I did that specifically, and I had interesting experiences off the back of that. Okay. Which I found interesting. Now, I guess I'm not because I think I can handle myself better. But I think it was a good phase for me to navigate through, because I've now come out the other side and I've realized my appearance, like excellence, will speak for itself. The way I carry myself will speak for itself. So I don't have to come in power to the people to try and get my point across. But there is a subtle difference. But I think I always maintain, not in all instances, but I always maintain that excellence cannot be ignored.
I love that.
So you can spread your attention in lots of different places, or you can spend your attention on being excellent, and it will not be ignored. And that has worked well for me so far.
I absolutely love it. I would say that for myself, a saying by an American footballer, Abby Wambach, which is, you can be grateful for what you have, but demand what you deserve, is something that I've held on to more recently in my leadership journey. And why do I say this? At the start of my leadership journey, I walked into rooms with a mindset of, I'm grateful to be here. Therefore, I was accepting of what was actually mediocre, or me being lowballed, or not being afforded the same opportunities as my peers were, not being given the same opportunities for advancement and access and all of that. But now I walk into rooms with a certain confidence where I'm like, I deserve to be here. I've got into this room and I've earned this seat on merit. And for that reason, I must advocate for myself. It is super important. And when I'm advocating for myself, it's not me asking for preferential treatment. It's me reminding you of the fact that I got here on merit. I deserve to be here. And if I'm to succeed as a leader in the organization, you need to help me help you, ultimately. So for me, I would say that I've observed the evolution in my mindset in terms of how I enter rooms and the thoughts that run through my mind, how they did initially in my leadership journey versus how they do now. And I have had people say to me, oh my gosh, Nikkei, you're so confident. I'm like, thank you, but it has been a journey. And at times it's been a painful one. And you guys have heard the voice notes. Yeah. There have been times when I'm like, help. I can't believe I'm here again. And I say that because the reality is that you may feel that you've cleared a hurdle in your career and you might excel and think, I'm done. The reality is you might find yourself travailing yet again, because all it takes is a change in manager, a change in organization, some form of change, right? The absence of constants, and there may be a reset. And you've got to remind yourself of, I think of the concept of the Oriki that Lovey Ajayi Jones talks about, how you big yourself up, talk about who you are, whose you are, where you've come from, where you're going. You have to affirm yourself in those ways before you enter new arenas, because you may find that time and time again, you have to keep reminding people of who you are.
Yeah, I think that's why having a board of directors is so important.
Absolutely. We've mentioned it a few times. Can you just talk a little bit about what it is?
Yeah,
because people
absolutely.
might not know.
So I feel a board of directors is essentially a group of people that you have. If you think of your career as a table,
or as a PLC, as a
business. PLC, as a company. So we talk a lot about being the CEO of your career. It's the people that you have around your board of you. So that would be, it might be your manager. Some people you choose and some people you don't. So whether you like it or not, you have a manager and you don't always choose who they are. I think your friends and family are part of your board, because when you're making big career decisions, you need to think about the impact on them. But then there are others you choose. So it might be your mentors and your sponsors, and those are different things. So I'm sure that will come up at some point. And you might have people who are just your cheerleaders, who are there to cheer you on. But I also add people like your industry leaders. There are people who mentor me, but they just don't know it, because I'm always talking them, learning about them, looking at their thought leadership, etc. So everybody has a board. I always say, once again, you have a board, whether you realize it or not, but it's how you curate that board to make sure it works for you. And so some of the points you made, Nikkei, around how you have to feel about yourself, sometimes it's those people who will remind you of who you are when you forget that. And you also talked about it being a journey or an evolution. You know, there's been times when I've had mentors who've helped me get to a place, but I've needed new mentors to get me to another stage of my evolution. So making sure it's different people every time, because once again, being strategic, but also just making sure you have people around you to remind you of who you are on the days that you forget, because those days do happen.
Like you wonderful ladies.
And do you know what? I think we need to remember to have a board of directors. We need to remember to have value, because there's a real, in the workplace, sometimes there is this, oh yeah, you just got the promotion because you're a woman, or you just got the promotion because you're black. And that is real. And I can see you sighing. I know you have a view on that. But that's why understanding your value, showing up in your excellence is so important, because yes, I'm a woman, yes, I'm black, but I'm also fantastic at my job. And that's the part.
It's so important.
Absolutely.
Because sometimes your perception of your excellence, some people are not qualified to identify your excellence. They
Say that again.
They can't take you to rooms that they've never been in, but they also do not have the expertise to recognize your expertise. And I think there's something about, when it comes back to that leading self, how do you tell your story in a way that brings people on a journey? If you identify disconnect in the way you're being treated, the way you are being sponsored, the way you're being promoted to the source that you believe you have, or your mentors are telling you have, or your family are telling you have, you need to make sure people understand that. Or you need to move on to a place that nurtures that. I think that's something that Nick has talked about, your environment. And I read somewhere that a shark can only grow as big as the environment it's in. So if you put a shark in a fish tank, it will only grow as big as the fish tank. But if you put it in the ocean, its growth potential is exponential.
Absolutely.
And I think we've got to look at ourselves that way. If you can take ownership for your own growth, no one can tell you that you aren't ready or capable enough. You just have to recognize that actually maybe they're not the right person to determine that. I need to find someone else who is. But until I find that person, I am taking accountability for making sure that I can grow to my fullest potential, so that I'm ready when that opportunity comes up.
Completely agree. And Hannah, I just wanted to come back to something you mentioned, I guess, about the challenges, the barriers that we have to clear as Black women in leadership. Sometimes we need to get out of our own way and out of our own heads, because we are appointed into this leadership role. Nobody else has said anything to us, but we then question ourselves. And sometimes because of past trauma, right? We've we're recalling scripts where we've been told before, well, only one of you can be promoted, or we've had to learn that we're going to have to work twice as hard to be promoted into that vice president position. But sometimes we need to recognize that we can be our own worst enemy when it comes to not allowing ourselves to celebrate our accomplishments and to, just thrive in those roles that on merit we've actually been given.
Yeah. I think everyone has a personal board of directors, whether they like it or not. Your family or friends pour into you and you listen all the time. And I think us talking about it, the importance is being intentional about who you're going to dial up and who you're going to dial down.
Absolutely.
And which relationships you're going to invest in. I think the key word here is intentional. Because we all have it. We all have the people that are normal, go to, the girl that you call every time, and blah, blah, blah. And if you're not intentional about how do I feel when I'm around this person, when I have a bad day, when I call them, how do I feel after that? If you're not able to suss who actually picks you up, who's telling you the truth, again, like you were talking about, good constructive feedback because you're actually looking to develop, then you just have friends and family around you. You're not getting the benefit of the full board of directors, but we all have it. It's not like go out and find new family. They're there.
We do have it, but we have to know why we need them, and we have to know what we're asking of them, because sometimes, so friends and family, I would put them into a slightly different category, absolutely on my board of directors, but they love me so much, so they're gonna be, they're gonna entertain my rubbish,
Some of them.
they'll hold us to account, but when you're going for a meeting with an MD or with a senior leader or with somebody in the corporate space, you know you're going to show up. You know you're going to make sure that you know what you're going to ask them. Do you know? And so that work needs to happen.
Yeah.
You know, what is it you want to get out of your board of directors?
That's the intentional bit.
That's the intention. Absolutely. That's the intentional piece. And so, you know, thinking about leadership more broadly, you know, it's about what I'm hearing from you is, you know what you want to do and where you want to go. Surround yourself with good people. Believe in yourself and embrace the innovative side of yourself, and use that as an advantage to build your career. Leadership looks different and evolves all the time, and so recognize that. Sit into empathy, vulnerability. We've talked a lot about as well. And so as you know, as we all continue on our leadership journey, I think they're really important traits to have. So thank you so much, ladies. I really appreciate it. And this conversation was awesome as always.
And that wraps up another episode of Reclaiming Narratives, a podcast by us, the 4Ds. We hope you enjoyed the conversation and found some valuable insights today. If you loved what you heard, don't forget to subscribe and leave us a review on your favourite podcast platform. It really helps us reach more listeners. We'd also love to hear from you. Connect with us on Instagram and TikTok at the 4D Pod to join the conversation and share your thoughts. You'll also find the Linktree link in our Instagram, where we have created some of our recommended resources to help you on your journey. Remember, every small intentional step you take makes a big difference. Until the next time, keep reclaiming your narrative and take care. With love, the 4Ds.